Hello and welcome to an installment of the FIT Soul Club Oral History Project, a program of Fashion Institute of Technology, one of 64 campuses of the State University of New York. This project is generously funded by FIT President Joyce F. Brown through her Diversity Grant Program initiative. The Soul Club of FIT was founded by FIT community member Clara Branch in 1968 after the death of Dr. Martin Luther King. I am Tor Orange, Director of FIT's Office of Educational Opportunity Programs. The resulting interview will be made available via the FIT Library's online video platform, Archive on Demand. The digital file and its transcription will become part of the official college archives. The library's unit of special collections and college archives administers the FIT oral history programs. And always a special thank you to Andrea Klein, Cataloging Associate at the Gladys Marcus Library, and Karen Trevette, Associate Professor and Head of Special Collections and College Archives. We have today really a great honor, Michael Harrell. Michael Harrell's vast experience in theater, film, and concert touring as a byproduct of his costume design is a great asset to his students at Fashion Institute of Technology. In addition to his Broadway experience with Frozen, Book of Mormon, he has toured with, get a load of this, Madonna, Christina Aguilera, and Britney Spears. He has worked with Gwen Stefani and Harry Styles. His celebrity clients include Miss Patti LaBelle, Patti LuPone, Steven Tyler, Scarlett Johansson, and Megan Mullally. Now, his work has appeared in films Gold and Top 5. Welcome, Michael Harrell.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Yeah. Nice to have you. We've been doing these interviews for several weeks now, and many have said that they should not proceed without Michael Harrell.
I'm sure they have many things to say about me, but I'll take that.
So we want to learn a little bit about who you are, and how you landed at FIT, but really starting with the beginning of Michael Harrell. So share with us a little bit about where you were born, where you were raised.
Okay, well, I'm a native New Yorker, born and raised and still reside in Harlem. And I didn't really have any creative background with my parents. I was pretty much the first one that ever went to any type of creative college or anything like that. With my parents' household, there was always the idea that there was work at the post office if all else failed. So
Job security,
benefits. Job security, because they don't quite understand the creative world. And so when I didn't start sewing until 10th grade. So it's not like I have any stories of dressing up my Ken dolls or Barbie dolls or anything like that. It didn't start until 10th grade. And that was a fluke. I was going to a concert and I wanted a new outfit. And even though my mother used to sew, she never taught me because that really wasn't a man's work, so to speak. So I would just stand in the kitchen and drink water, glass after water, glass of water after water, and watch her do some things. So when on my way to when I wanted to go to the concert, of course, as a teenager, you never think your parents are cool enough to make anything for you because they're your parents. So I asked the girl in the neighborhood if she could make an outfit for me. And she said yes. So I brought her the fabric, bought her the fabric. And when it came time to pick the garment up, she had only done the vest. She hadn't done the pants. And the concert was the following day. So, of course, I'm thinking, what am I going to do? I want to be cute going to this concert. So then I realized, well, okay, my mother's not at home this weekend. I'm not sure where she went because I always known her to be at home. So I thought, okay, she won't allow me to touch her machine, but she can kill me when she comes back. So the girl had already cut the pants out. It was a simplicity pattern, actually, and it was denim. I'll never forget that. And she had cut the pattern out, and I had never threaded a sewing machine. I had never turned a sewing machine on or anything like that. But because the sewing machines have numbers on them, so you can follow the numbers on how to thread a machine. So I threaded the machine, and I wound my bobbins, and it took me all night long. It took me 3 large spools of thread actually to finish a pair of pants. And I wish I had them now so I could see what I really looked like going to this concert. But that was the first time I ever put in a zipper, ever did a bobbin. I had nothing, never had any sewing experience whatsoever until that one time that I was sat down. I was determined to make these pants. And of course, when you're that age, you can stay up all night long and go to school the following morning because sleep is not a priority. But at that point, I had to have these pants, and that was my first time ever sitting down to a sewing machine.
Interesting. What high school?
Oh, actually, I went to 2 high schools. I went to a Catholic school, private school. And so from the private school there, then of course, we went to an all-boys high school. And so probably around the same time I realized I wanted to start sewing. I wanted to be creative because I was really tired of wearing that same uniform, the blue pants and the white shirt with the plaid tie. So I thought that, okay, I'm going to go to the same high school as my brother, which was Taft High School in the Bronx, which of course has nothing to do with much of anything creative or parochial. And so that was the first time actually in that school, in that curriculum, my 10th grade year, which also at that point, I was able to do, even though they put me back a year when I started, because the curriculum from parochial school to public school is very different. So I was able to do 11th and 12th in 1 year because I knew the information. I just had to go along with their curriculum. So in the final year, they were finally allowed men to take home ec because at that point in time, men took shop, women took home ec.
Absolutely.
Okay, so they allowed us to take home ec, and I thought, I know how to sew. I've got this credit, no problem about it. So I took the course, and the teacher, at that point, she said, for our final project, we're going to do a jacket. It cannot have any lining, any collar, any cuffs, any pockets, or any buttons. So I thought, well, what are we doing? What are we doing? But I figured, okay, well, she's allowing us to do it over the Christmas holiday and just bring it back with us when we return. So, of course, my being me, I went to the sewing center somewhere in here in the city. Oh, she said no plaid and no stripes. So it had to be a solid color. So I'll never forget, I bought this Christian Dior pattern that was a dropped raglan sleeve and buffalo plaid with bound buttonholes, cuffs, totally lined, everything she didn't want. It's what I did. And I made it, and I took it in, and I was so proud of it. And she looked at it and said, well, I don't think you did these pockets. Take these pockets out. So I explained to her that once the fabric is cut, you can't take these pockets out. They're done. So to make a long story short, she failed me. I failed the course. So my mother came up and talked to her, to the principal and everything. So the principal gave me enough credit to pass, get my diploma. But the woman, the individual, never gave me credit for the course. Then come to find out, being that it was the first time that she was teaching sewing, she was actually taking AP 101 in the evenings here at FIT. So that was one of the reasons why, not to say that's good or bad, but she was just learning how to sew, and she was probably still on Peter Pan collars and journals at that point.
You had exceeded even
I pretty much did.
Capacity.
Right. So that was when I was first getting into it. And so when I started FIT, it wasn't like a situation where I thought I wanted to be a designer and burn the world or anything like that. It was really because all of my friends were in New York, were in the city, and I didn't want to go away to college, which wasn't an option in my household. You were going to college, but my mother went to college, so she decided all of her children were going to go to college. So I just thought, I know how to sew a little bit, no problem. I can breeze through FIT. I had no idea about the curriculum, about what was required. I just thought that it was fashion, it was sewing, I can do this. So I had no idea.
Actually, certainly not the rigors.
No idea. Yeah. But I managed to get through. And that's really my foray into FIT. I can't really say that I really had this premonition that I want to go to school. Even though I'm from New York, and of course that's the main fashion capital, I never really looked at it as anything more than I knew how to sew. I had no idea where my sewing ability would take me, even if I knew how to. What I knew how to do, what I could do at that particular point. I had no idea what it would do, but that's my reason for getting into FIT.
So to what extent did your parents embrace the talent?
Well, initially, like I mentioned previously, they just thought it was all a joke. They gave me 2 years to get through it. But in the interim, there was such a dynamic that was happening in my life at that point because my godmother, who lived upstairs in the same building that we lived in, she was a dancer and a performer at Billy Rose's Diamond Horseshoe and the Cotton Club. I think that's right, Billy Rose, Cotton Club. Okay. And so she would constantly take me to the Apollo to see live shows. Mm-hmm. So I kind of grew up in the Apollo. Mm-hmm. And I remember going up to her apartment and, she would come to the door and I would kiss her and then I'd run into her bedroom. And in her bedroom, she had this steamer trunk that was in her closet. So I would go into the closet and I would pull out the steamer trunk and I would open it up. And in that particular trunk, she had all of her programs, her still photos, her headshots, everything from that time period. Okay. So I would just look through these photos and look at these images and just imagine myself just being in the audience, looking at these things. Okay, but it was still a fantasy at that point. I was a little kid at that point, so I never had any idea that all of this would actually come to fruition at some point. Mm-hmm. So I remember she bought me my first sewing machine, actually, because I couldn't touch my mother's sewing machine. Mm-hmm. But she bought me my first sewing machine. And like I said, she took me to the Apollo on many instances. I remember one instance where we stayed at the Apollo for, I think, because they had several shows a day. So I think we got there for the first show, and probably by the 11 o'clock show, I remember my mother had come to the Apollo walking up and down the aisles calling my name because I hadn't come home. Okay. So even with my godmother, she was wondering what happened to us. But so I got to see a lot of live performances and meet a lot of performers through my little autograph book that I once had. And so that was kind of my foray also into celebrity. But at that point, I didn't realize it. And of course, coming from New York, where fashion rules, even though Broadway is in close proximity to the fashion industry, the two really didn't connect until recently, where Broadway and fashion really were more entwined. At that point in time, it was just two very separate entities. And I had no idea that a Broadway world or life could even exist. And I remember, of course, going to my first Broadway show, and it was like going into St. Patrick's Cathedral for me. Mm. I mean, I had on my little blue suit and I was dressed up, and you go over to your chair, your velvet chair, and the lights come on and the red velvet curtains, and it was an overture and an orchestra, and it was like church to me. Mm-hmm. So once again, that was my introduction to live performance, but because I was, so into fashion or things like that, I just kind of geared everything toward fashion.
Well, something as you share, I envision, I too have Harlem roots, although I was born and raised in the Bronx. My both sets of grandparents migrated from the South to Harlem. And so most of my social time, a lot of the time when I was being babysat, was in Harlem. I wonder to what extent you coming from Harlem and seeing even on Sunday the outfits, the hats, because those were the days when people dressed to go to church.
Yes.
And really did put on their, quote, finest.
Exactly.
The extent to which that also framed the appreciation for design and for costuming, along with what you saw and experienced through your godmother and at the Apollo.
Oh, definitely.
Harlem experience.
Definitely. That was definitely a large part of it. Because as you mentioned, people dressed up to go to wherever. Just play
They didn't just dress, they dressed up.
Exactly. I remember looking at photos of myself when I was a little kid. And at that point, the color was called oxblood, which was a dark red at that point. And I just loved oxblood shoes. So every Christmas, every day I still have the photos of, I always wore something that was gray, or I had on a gray tweed with a red speckle in it with these red shoes. So red was my color through childhood. So as I got older, and I played dress up for Easter, because the one time that we played dress up was definitely on Easter. I remember looking at my photos currently and thinking, wow, I was really overdressed compared to what we look like now, totally overdressed. Absolutely. But at that point, if you were in your silk or your shark skins or whatever the case may be, it was just kind of normal to look like that.
It was the finest to dress up.
It was just plain dress up at that point. And that's just what we looked like. So on that issue, then yes, I did learn coordination, so to speak, of garments and colors and fabrication that don't kind of look too good. But of course, we were also able to mix and match fabrics at that point as well. As we got closer to the 60s and the mod era, we were able to mix and match certain things. But then again, of course, then shoes came into play. Mm-hmm. You know, everyone was doing shoes came into play. So yeah, so there's always been a part of my life, mm-hmm. especially coming up into it and having a brother and a godmother like I did, and my mother and her friends that they would go to their adult party that we weren't allowed to go to, and they would play dress up and get in their lace dresses and all these things that they would do that we weren't allowed to unless we wanted to sneak by the room or something, like we were on our way to the kitchen or to the bathroom.
Ease the door open. Until
exactly.
They told you slam it,
exactly.
Close that door.
Exactly. And so then I would notice that, oh, Mrs. Green's shoes don't match her dress. In my mind, that's what I'm thinking to myself, because I'm seeing everyone else that has on certain colors with a matching dress or a rhinestone on their shoe and a brooch or something. So I was saying, okay, I think I get it. Things like that. And then, of course, as I got older, Ebony Fashion Fair started to appear. So that was something else that I was finally able to see.
Share a little bit briefly about the Ebony Fashion Fair. Some of the viewers may not be familiar with it.
Okay, the Ebony Fashion Fair was started by Eunice Johnson, and her husband owned Ebony Magazine. And Eunice was very much into fashion, and even though Black people at that point really weren't a major part of Paris runway shows or couture shows, Eunice was there, and they allowed her to come in because she was spending thousands and thousands of dollars for every invitation that they allowed her to get. So she was able to buy clothes off the runway to use in her shows, the Ebony Fashion Fair.
Interesting.
So, of course, as today, money still talks. So, of course, if she went to Saint Laurent and she was able to plop down $50,000 for whatever the case may be, the word had spread. There was this Black woman that's spending cash, let her in, type of a thing. So what it really boils down to. So, with all of that, and of course, away from the lights, and her reputation grew. Well, I'm not sure how many sales they were making from having sold that garment, but of course, at that point, I think they were more concerned with selling that one garment than having anybody from Harlem try to contact their houses to buy a garment. And so that's how the Ebony Fashion Fair really started. I mean, that's really a capsule version of it. But it went on for years. And so with that, I got to see a lot of clothing that I only saw in magazines, which we didn't have many magazines at that point. But we didn't have many TV shows either at that point for fashion.
But we had Ebony.
And so that was my foray into really actually getting to see some of the things up close before I actually started gate crashing fashion shows myself.
Interesting. How did you get to FIT? You talked a little bit about sort of that transition, that it was like the most natural place to land, but that you really didn't have lots of expectations about what would be at FIT.
I didn't.
What did you find?
When I got to FIT, or my journey to FIT? Well, on my journey, of course, I would just say before we get to that, you needed a portfolio of some sort to come into FIT. And of course, I did not know how to draw at all. Unless I knew how to sew a little bit. That was my extent to the world, so to speak, was my sewing. And so I remember looking at sketches not online at that point, through photos or whatever the case may be. And so I remember I went to the stationery store that was closest to my apartment, and I got some onion skin, which was actually typing paper at that point. And I saw these figures, and I took it wasn't even a fine point Sharpie at that point. It was just a regular felt tip pen. And I drew the outline and tried to look like I was drawing some pleated garments or whatever on these sketches that I was doing. And that was my first portfolio. I still have some of those sketches actually at home. It's really embarrassing. I'm surprised they even let me in if those sketches really depended on my entry. So that was my foray into trying to do something as a designer, because I never really thought about design. I just thought I knew how to sew. I'm going to get through this. Okay, pretty much. Like I said, because creativity was the furthest thing from my mind as far as design was concerned. And even though I made garments for my friends or whatever, it was just kind of making garments for them. It wasn't like I thought of it as a career at any point. Now, when I got to FIT, Patty Carpenter and I, who are still friends, we were the first two people in line. At that point, you had to get in line to go to the registrar's office on the first floor of the only building at that point, which is now the C building. And we were the first two in line.
That's way back.
That's way back. That's way back. I took it back. And she's from DC actually. And we started talking, we became friends, and we're still friends to this day actually. And that was my first friend that was actually had the same mindset that I did, as opposed to people just patronizing me, saying, "Oh, that's great, you can do this, no problem." Someone that actually understood and wanted to venture into a creative aspect of their life. So that was my first friend that I met. And when I got into FIT, of course, I had no idea about the curriculum, the liberal arts, the draping aspect of it. There's so many things I just didn't know, that I didn't enjoy seeing how things were created, which of course, once again goes back into where I'm at today in my life is the creative part of building a garment, which is really what brought me to FIT in the first place. Well, my design career was great. However, I've always been very interested in how garments are built and made, so to speak.
What was it like to be a student of color during that era? And what years are we talking about?
Oh, we're talking 200 years ago today. Probably early 70s. Early 70s. As far as being a Black student was concerned, I think coming from New York, you probably already had that extra layer of skin already to not really be insulted as much or being able to just ignore certain things. So by coming to school and seeing that, of course, there were obviously white students, Asian students, lots of students that were non-Black. But I, just like many of the students, seeing that there was a Black subculture in the school just made everything much better.
Why so?
Because there's a certain unspoken language that you have with people from your culture that you have to explain to others. Mm-hmm. And so with that being said, not that we had this language no one could understand, we all spoke English, but just being around each other and knowing our journey somewhat of how to get to the school and what's expected of us and what we had to do to get there. Mm-hmm. That meant we all bonded over not all of us, but there were some people there that were just in their own world. That's very true. But if anything else, you try to find your tribe wherever you're at. And in FIT,
pull one another along.
Or pull one another along. And I think that was the camaraderie that we had at school during that point for a lot of us. Of course, there were some of us that could not be bothered, and that's fine also. But that's one thing that I didn't really expect. But I think so many people that I came in contact with at that point really didn't know what to expect because they were always or somewhat the other in their neighborhoods. Mm-hmm. So when we got to FIT, there were lots of others. So we all the others bonded, if that makes sense.
So this oral project that we're participating in right now has a lot to do with the creation and the delivery of the Soul Club.
Yes.
Share what your experience was with the Soul Club.
When I first came in contact with or heard about the Soul Club, which was actually a room, I think, on the 6th floor, I think, if I'm not mistaken. And we would all go there and not really knowing what to expect at that point. It's just the fact that it was a unifying central place for a lot of us to hang out. Okay. So we met, we met each other, and we talked and we hung out. We had lunch. We sat on the outside of the building and just talked about certain things and aspirations. And we did little fashion shows or whatever the case may be that we were able to do at that point with our limited resources. And the Soul Club actually brought a lot of us together in the sense that as far as lasting relationships, I'm not really sure how many lasted beyond the Soul Club. But at that point in time, I do think there was using the word again, a camaraderie amongst us because we were able to connect in some place other than the classroom. Because all of us were in divided classes, we weren't all in the same class. But at least there we could all bring what we were going to bring to the table. And during our lab classes, let's say we were doing a soul show. During our lab classes, which we were all working on garments for the soul show, we would be there until 2:00 in the morning. And of course, security couldn't wait to get us out because they wanted to close up. But we were all working on garments for the Soul Club. And someone will be trying to figure, okay, I only have 1.5 yards of this fabric. What can I do? Then somebody else will come over and do a sketch on the board and say, why don't you do this? So we were constantly helping each other out. So that was really a good thing during that time period. And also because it was the early 70s, so there was a Black Power movement at that point as well. So, of course, we didn't realize we were a part of it at that point. Not that we were, clenching our fists or anything, but it was a movement, and we just didn't realize that we were a part of it at that point.
What role did Clara Branch play?
Miss Branch, yes. Well, there's two parts. There's one for the record and one off the record. She ruled with an iron fist. It was definitely her room, her vision, her friends, her favorites. And of course they got what you would get as being a favorite. Now, as far as her vision is concerned and why it happened or what she brought or what made them acknowledge it at FIT, I have no idea. I was just able to be a part of it at some point when all were two circles entwined. So I have no idea what started. I didn't really know. But what she brought to us and what she allowed us to do and have and see, looking at it in hindsight, was really unparalleled compared to what I've heard other students say that went to a college or fashion college or something that was out of state or somewhere else, and how they were so singular in what they had to go through or how they had to learn certain things from one perspective without really having anyone acknowledge their perception and perspective of what they were bringing to the table and embracing it for what it was worth. Because we would get one word from some of our instructors, which wasn't always pleasant, like, oh, this is not the feel for you. The garments look too costumey, or whatever the case may be, whatever train they were on that felt they could say things like that to you. But then when we went down to the office, Miss Branch's room, the Soul Club room, and we were all around each other, and we were just talking about, oh, so-and-so just dogged me out in class today. And then you would hear, oh, don't worry, so-and-so does it all the time. Let's see what your garment looks like. And so then we would get critiqued again from a point that it was your peer critiquing you, telling you what you could do better, as opposed to just saying your garment was wrong in the first place. So it was that kind of camaraderie that was in the Soul Club that I thought was unparalleled. You just couldn't get anywhere else.
The difference between being made to feel wrong versus receiving honest critique and feedback to improve, but not feeling wrong.
Yes. And now I'm not saying I'm one of those instructors now, I'm not saying that their vision was wrong. I just think that possibly being young and naive and dealing with certain people in a time period where certain things could be said without any repercussions, they just pushed that envelope and did it.
And that's really what I'm referring to. I have heard and I continue to hear far too often sentiments that kind of indicate that the student themselves are wrong as designers. Not in terms of their vision is wrong, their creative vision, but being left to feel as though they as a person, they are wrong in being a designer, that this simply is not for you, as opposed to helping a student improve their work, improve their creativity. So students emerge feeling very wounded and feeling as though they just don't belong. Definitely.
And I tell my students that if you go on an interview, let's say, or if you do have an instructor, myself excluded, that does say something that triggers you to a certain point, just don't take it too personal, because they could be having a bad day that has nothing to do with you.
Right.
That's one thing. They could want someone else to get their favorite position or whatever the thing may be that your garment or whatever you're presenting to them. is they may want someone else to get that position, but they see that what you're offering is actually better, so they're not going to tell you it's better because they're going to try to find fault in it to clear the path for someone else. Okay, so these are the things that I learned after a while, of course, which is, I can't really say when I started learning that, but so that part of that did come in with a lot of instructors at FIT, I mean, instructors in general, just in life in general, I guess. But I think by having the group of people that I had or that I was around, I was able to be around at that point was so enlightening and just embracing that, that have I ever missed that camaraderie in life? Sure I have, because we were all on a path to a journey to somewhere. We had no idea where we were going, but we were all on that path. So no one could dog anyone else out because we had no idea what to expect. So that's why. So I think what the Soul Club brought to a lot of students was the ability to not be a part of that. For those who've never heard it, that crab in a barrel, so to speak. That one off, that one only, because we were all in the barrel together. So no one was trying to. I shouldn't say that no one was trying. Some people were, but for the most part, the foundation was very good. So if one person got to the top, that's fine. If one person was able to climb out the barrel, that's fine. Then there was still enough of us that we kept each other comfortable and on our path.
The fashion shows themselves,
yes,
served as what kind of opportunity?
Oh, goodness. Exposure. That's really to sum it up in one word. It was exposure. Though we have no idea who was looking at it.
I was just about to ask you, exposure to who and to what?
Exactly. We had no idea who was looking at it. But we were able to see our vision on the runway, which, of course, at that point, the runway was it. There was no social media at that point. There wasn't a lot of paparazzi and photography or anything happening. So it was really about the runway.
Very true.
So if we got to see our vision or something we thought of or we drew on a napkin in the lunchroom coming to fruition on the runway, then that's all she wrote. It didn't really matter if anyone bought it or it sold or anything like that because we weren't business people at that point. We were just creatives.
And to have an audience, a platform and an audience.
Exactly. And when the audience applauded your garment, you thought you were in seventh heaven. You were still taking the train home, having a tuna fish sandwich. Didn't matter.
You had to plunk the token in.
Exactly. And go back home and so now that that's done, let's start it again tomorrow. Let's see where that goes. Because once it's done or the fashion shows were over, those 3 shows I think we did. Okay, let's move on. Type of a thing. But then again, there was like Leonard Davis. His mother used to have fashion shows in DC for her organization. So he would take a group of us. His mother would rent a bus, and he would take a group of us with our garments and the models and garments up to DC or down to DC, and we would do a show for them. So it kind of branched out in several places, but a lot of it was because of what we were able to gather and how we wanted our garments to look, how we wanted our models to look, and things like that during the Soul Show. Now, of course, there were favorites during the Soul Show as well, which I mentioned. They always got the opening and the closing. We, for the most part, I won't mention any names, but there were several that did that, though their garments were not necessarily as well made or several other things of the garments in the show. That went back to the favoritism of the powers that be. Yes.
Any one show that you remember most?
Well, there are a couple of shows actually. There was one when I hadn't eaten all day long to get the garment done, and I had a tuna fish sandwich in my bag, and I thought that was the right time to pull the tuna fish sandwich out was during the show, which obviously it was not. So I remember that because everyone was saying, "What in the hell are we smelling?" So I remember that. I have a few memories. There was one that I think was Jamie McDonald. He opened the show with his gigantic ball skirts with feathers, and that was gorgeous. Then there was another show where there was a model that I was given. That wasn't my choice, but that was the only one that was available. And she was a little larger than the size of my garment. And when she tried it on, I remember her saying, "Where is my girdle? Where is my girdle?" And I don't remember what year that was, but I remember her saying that. So I have memories of the show, and I have memories of more or less working during lab for the show. I have memories of garments being turned down, which of course was disheartening, because like I said, you look at other people's garments that were the favorites, and theirs was nowhere near as well made or well constructed or as colorized or as visual as you would have thought you needed for a show. So there was that aspect of it also. Everything wasn't as smooth sailing because we were all in it together. Like personally, how can I put this? Miss Branch was never warm to me. I've seen the warmth coming toward other people. Not to say we ever had an argument or we ever did anything wrong. It was just that I just wasn't one of them, which is fine. Right. I wasn't in that circle. I was kind of an offshoot of that circle, which was fine. I had no problem with that. So I never really got choice of fabrications or quality fabrics or things like that. But that was fine because I was able to, luckily I was in a situation where I could purchase my own fabrications that I needed. So if there were, so in my mind, because of the way I was raised, for whatever reason, those other students got it. If they were in need of it, or if they were chosen by someone else, I knew I could always get mine as well. So that kind of allowed me to say, okay, that's fine. Do your thing. I'm going to do my thing. Type of attitude.
Post FIT, how did you, well, what did you do actually following FIT? You did one degree or the two? Two.
Well, it ended up being two.
Both in fashion design?
No, one was in fashion, one was in, and my other year was in pattern making technology.
That's right. The years when we had a pattern making.
Exactly, when there was a pattern making department, period, in places.
Absolutely.
And actually, that started because when I still owed them FIT a few classes, and it was during the summer. I was going to take the courses during the summer because I didn't really graduate with my class at that point. I would have got my diploma a little bit later in the same year. I started working for designer Mary McFadden. And she was really well known at that point. And it was just on the board at the employment office or whatever they were calling it at that point. And I thought, I'll give her a call. So I called and they said, well, come on in. So I went in for the interview. And later that day, because at that point we didn't have beepers, pagers, or anything like that, so they were calling my home phone. So I called in and got the messages, and I got the message that, yes, we would like you to start on Monday. So I thought, this is great. So I started that Monday, and of course I couldn't go to school, couldn't go to summer school. I had finished that semester, but I couldn't go to summer school. And so while I was working with her, at that point in time, I didn't realize how special it was, but it was a work table about the size of this, or maybe a little bit wider. There was a pattern maker on the opposite side of the table, and his name was George. And I thought it was quite common to see an African-American or Black pattern maker working at that point. So I thought, oh, this is great. You know, he thought this is what the world is offering everybody now. And so we started talking, and he said to me, so what are you studying in school? I said, fashion design. And he said, which I'll never forget, well, if you want to have longevity in this business, you need a more technical skill. Go back to school and take pattern making. And that's what I did.
Not as sexy as fashion design, but certainly.
Well, no, it wasn't as creative as fashion design, but he explained to me that once the sketch is done, if you don't have anything else to bring to the table, then you're no longer part of that sandwich. Because I can give you a sketch and send it off to wherever, or overseas or wherever the case may be now, and I'm done as a designer. Yes. But how can I keep myself involved in this sandwich, in this package? And so he explained that to me, and I thought, well, that makes total sense. Of course, I had no idea why or what it would actually equate to, but I thought, okay, he's working, he has a better job, he's getting paid more than I am, so I'm going to listen to him, type of a thing. And so that's when I started my pattern making technology. And so I did all my years, my computerized grading and just everything that was being offered at in that curriculum at that point. And so I was working a lot as a pattern maker as well. So basically, I was doubled up as far as employment, whatever came about, I could take. If it was a design job, I've got you covered.
Mm-hmm.
If it was a pattern making technical job, I've got you covered.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So with those two, I won't say degrees because I haven't gotten a degree in the second one yet. But with that ammunition, I just decided, okay, I can handle this. So a lot of my friends that only did have a fashion design degree or certificate at that point, if there wasn't a job available for them, then they weren't able to actually maneuver as well as I was able to because I did have that technical experience as well.
Right, right.
Yes.
Much narrower path
Yes.
for them.
Yes.
Broadway. Ooh.
Broadway.
Ooh. And what was it like being a Black man in that arena?
Well, I'm still in that arena. And yeah, well, that's another interview. But yes, so my first job was with Mary McFadden. And from there, I was able to kind of maneuver in that world because I had a designer credit of it as my first job. So I started working on her licensees, which was, I forgot what the company was. But then from that licensee, I went to Halston 4. I went to that licensee. From that licensee, I went to Dior. So I was still doing all these things, still working on 7th Avenue, like part-time, doing several things, like at home, with several patterns at home, or things like that, whatever they wanted me to do at that point. So that was really good as well as I was able to see, when I did my licensees, I was able to go to the shows. So while I wasn't actually able to be a part of the runway show, I was actually able to go into the workrooms of those houses to see the garments, feel the fabric, see how it was done. So they would say, well, okay, Michael, this is the fabric that we're using for the runway show, but we need something that looks like this at a much smaller price point for your division. So I was able to look at that fabric, and with the Halston garments, they would say, okay, this is the pad. They would send me all the patterns, all of his patterns, to use just in a less expensive fabric. So I had access to all of Halston patterns, which I still may have some tracings at home. Excuse me, Halston. I may have some tracings at home for some of his patterns. So that's how I started my foray into fashion. Was I just kept going, kept moving, and then when the fashion design aspect actually kind of dried up, so to speak, or I just shouldn't say it dried up. I didn't have any reason to continue to pursue it because my pattern making kind of took over.
Right.
You know, so with that, I would get calls from Donna Karen, Oscar. So my pattern making did very good for me as well. And I remember as far as moving into the creative Broadway arena, I was working at the Gap in product development. And a friend of mine, Ebony Wilkerson, was working for Donna Karen at that point. And he had called me, or I guess maybe we had phones at that point. They probably looked like TV remote controls at that point, but we probably had cell phones. He contacted me and said, Patti LaBelle is here, and she is offering backstage tickets to see her show. I said, but Edward, we don't have tickets to see her show. He said, that's why I'm calling you. I want you, she was at Town Hall. I want you to go to Town Hall and get tickets. So I thought, well, okay. So I was on 40-something street on the east side at that point. So I went over to Town Hall, stood in line for hours, and I bought 5 tickets. Well, everyone knows currently that it's very difficult to get 5 tickets together unless you're in the nosebleed section. And of course, that's where we were, the very last row of the top tier. So we probably couldn't even see her. So she gave us 5 backstage passes. Everyone got in to her room except me. Everyone was able to slide in except me. So I'm standing outside and thinking, well, okay, at least I got to see the show. At least I can tell my friends that I was standing outside of her stage door.
Here.
Exactly. So the door opened, her room door opened, and 2 people were coming out. And when they were coming out, they had their backs toward where I was standing, and someone just grabbed my hand and pulled me in behind them. So by this time, the door closed, and I'm standing face to face with Patti LaBelle. And she's wondering, well, who are you? So I said, hi, I'm here. And Edward introduced me. because he was working with Donna, and she was at Donna's to get meet and greet clothes. Meet and greet is when it's like red carpet, where they give you clothes just for photographers and to be seen, and then you return them. It's called meet and greet. So she was doing a meet and greet. And that's why she was at Donna Karan and had Donna Karan's clothes. Hence, that's why everyone got backstage passes. So when I finally got into the room, what could I say? I said, I loved your show. Who does your clothes? And she mentioned the guy, Tony. I remember his last name. It was Tony something. And I said, oh, that's great. She said, but I really need some clothes for the next leg of my tour. And I said, oh, I have something to show you. Mind you, I had nothing to show her. I had nothing. I just thought, and I'm not very aggressive like that as far as my work is concerned, because it had been so good for me thus far. I never had to push myself on anybody like
Michael,
that.
that was that New Yorker.
That was the New Yorker in me. Okay, it was.
With a tinge of the Harlem.
With a tinge of Harlem, because it was an opportunity. So I figured I better jump on this opportunity. And I said, I have something to show you. And she looked me up and down. I was a fan. I had on jeans and sneakers at that point. And she looked me up and down and kind of dismissed me and said, okay, give them to Edward, just like that. So I ran home. And at that point, I wasn't a very fast illustrator. I wasn't a very fast sketcher. But I did know that in order to do a sketch that several celebrities would look at, you needed in their image. Mm-hmm. So I went around and I was looking for a lot of her visuals, her pictures, her hair, her jewelry, all these things that I could, if even my sketch looked wrong, I wanted to look as close to what she looked like as possible. Right.
She needs to see herself in those
exactly,
sketches.
exactly. Excuse me a minute. Oh, okay,
and this is post LaBelle, I would imagine.
Yes. This is post LaBelle, yes, post LaBelle. I didn't do LaBelle. Larry Legatsby. Right, Larry Legatsby did LaBelle. Mm-hmm. So this is when she finally started touring as a soloist. Okay. And so I went home, I did the sketches, and I ran to B&J's or whatever fabric store it was at that point and got swatches, and I gave them back to Edward and sent them to and Edward sent them to her. Or rather, when her assistant came in to return the clothes, Edward gave the assistant the sketches. So, and that particular night, I had bought a Patti LaBelle t-shirt, that I was sleeping in at that point. So,
a real devotee. Huh?
Yes. So about a week passed, and I hadn't heard anything. Another week passed, I hadn't heard anything, but I was telling my friends I got to submit sketches to Patti LaBelle. How great is that? So I remember and I was still at the Gap working in product development, and I was doing pattern making in product development. And one Tuesday night into Wednesday morning, my telephone rang. And it was probably like 2 o'clock, 2:30. So I picked the phone, hello, is this Michael Harrell? So I said, it's 2:30, don't you know who you're calling? And the voice said, is this Michael? I said, yes, who is this? So I'm arrogant, so I have to get up at 7 o'clock in the morning to go to work. So I said, who is this? And the voice says, it's Patti LaBelle. So I'm thinking my friends are playing a joke on me because they knew that I submitted sketches, right? So I said, Patti LaBelle, yeah, right, sing something for me. And she sang about 2 lines of Over the Rainbow. So by this time, I'm sitting up in the bed, frozen, thinking every chance I had is a wrap. It's gone. It's gone. It's not going to happen.
And you disrespected Miss Patti.
I did, because I thought it was a joke. And I know my friends couldn't sing, so that was the one way I could nail it if they couldn't sing. So she said, I got your sketches, and I really liked a few of them. I'll be in Westchester at the Westbury Music Center, which I don't even know is still around anymore, and I would like to meet you. I thought, this is great. She said, so do you have a car to come up there? I said, no, I don't. She said, I'll send one for you. So I go, this is going great at 2:30 in the morning. So I went up there, took her measurements, which is so interesting. She had on a thick shawl-collared terry cloth robe. So I had to take her measurements over the robe. Mm. But so I figured, okay, this is not going to work. So then I asked her if she had a garment that she wasn't wearing that I could use. Mm-hmm. So I took the garment and got the measurements from the garment, which is the pattern making aspect of the design world that I was in at this point. So that's how I met Patti LaBelle. And she took, I think, maybe 2 sketches at that point, which I still have autographed, actually. I still have those. And that's how I met Patti. So,
and she's still wearing the most fabulous outfits, even to this day.
Well, thank you. And I would say a lot of it is revisioned from my time that I was with her. I don't really work with her. We're still in contact, but I don't do design for her anymore because after doing what we did, our time had come to pass, so it was all good. But I do remember thinking to myself, wow, because when I was a little kid, speaking of LaBelle, and they were on television, they were on television, and my mother said, would you ever want to design for Patti LaBelle? And I said, oh, Mom, get over it. I'm just a boy from Harlem. What would she want with me? She has thousands of designers. And I never thought anything more about it. And so, of course, that came to fruition. So it was, I guess I'm really going back to how many things have happened in my life that kind of actually happened somewhere else down the line. And the one thing I will say with Patti is it was definitely a boot camp because I had never worked with a celebrity of that caliber. I had done people that had dance singles out, or disco singles and things like that, and made garments for them, but never anyone of that caliber. And so by being in the green room is where everyone sits or compresses, before or after a show. By sitting in the green room, while there are so many performers around me, and just to be in that element once again, where because Patti was so used to being in the element of the Grammys, the Soul Train Awards, the American Music Awards, the Country Music Awards, all these award shows, and so she's there performing like normal, and I'm sitting there thinking, okay, that's Gloria Estefan sitting next to me. That's so-and-so sitting, and you can't really do anything because now we call it fanboying or fangirl, but of course you couldn't do all that. And so you have to keep it professional. So you just kind of go in the bathroom or the restroom, sometimes just think, oh my God. And you just kind of scream to yourself, do a silent scream, and just go back out with your composure and say hello to everybody, because they were also coming into her space to say hello to her. And I was part of her team. And so that also helped me realize people respond to you and react and treat you how they meet you.
Say that again.
If I can. People treat you, people treat you how they meet you. Okay. If they met me, or when they did meet me with someone like a Patti LaBelle, then automatically I would get respect because I was part of her team as opposed to being a fan. And that's why I tell my students today that you have to maintain a certain composure of professionalism, because once you ask someone for a photo or a like or a selfie or something, you automatically have crossed over into the fan, and you're no longer a professional. Right. So they cannot just be the person they were. And I also explained to my students, in one instance, I had a friend contact me and she said, Michael, we need some alterations done. Can you come by the theater? So I thought, okay, fine. What time do you need me there? She said, can you get here at 3:00? No problem. So I got to the theater at 3:00, and she still didn't tell me what it was. I'm thinking it was just a showpiece from some show she was working at. So she ushers me in to the green room. So I'm sitting backstage, and she says, okay, get ready, get your pens out and everything, and tape measures, whatever you need, and we'll be back. So I'm thinking, okay, what's the big secret? Who is we? But okay, so I'm doing what I'm doing. And so then she comes in and says, hi, Michael. This is Scarlett. Scarlett, this is Michael. It was Scarlett Johansson. And I'm using that scenario because Scarlett Johansson, she showed up in pin curls, maybe a tank top, torn jeans, flip-flop. She was not Scarlett Johansson that you see as a movie star. And I say that because the person that you're fitting is not the person they're going to become. And so in my styling class, well, in the styling program, I tell the students to, no matter how many racks of clothes you may have for this individual, don't be a designer for a minute or a stylist for a minute. Look in the mirror and become one with that person in the mirror, because that's who the audience is paying to see. They're not paying to see the person that came in the door without that garment on.
They want to see.
And that person, star. And when that person was in the mirror, when they start zhuzhing it up and they start turning their collar up and flattening things out or lowering their neckline, they're becoming that person. So that person is the one that you need to address. Because if you can transform the person that came into the room into the person they see in the mirror, then you become the golden child.
Right. Right.
And that's part of I would say for me, it was just part of everything I had been through, from design to pattern making to styling, to made me realize what that is. So when I finally started working for Patti, and I was able to actually pretty much nail what she wanted, because she would call me from London and say, I need a garment. I'm doing this special I just signed on for. It's next week. So I would say, okay. So I had an idea of what she wanted, where we were going. So I would just kind of make a garment, hope it worked, And it did. Knock on wood, it did. So that was kind of getting to know that person. But also, it also came down to the fact that I didn't have her for measurements. Mm-hmm. I couldn't really send her half a garment and have someone else pin it. So that was part of my the pattern making aspect of my design career. And also, as far as Pat is concerned, the garment that she wore when she won her first Grammy Award, everyone thinks it was like 1970, but actually it was like 1998 or 1999. That was a black suit with an off-the-shoulder cuff trimmed in mink. Mm. That garment is now in the Smithsonian's new museum.
And was yours?
And was mine, yes. So they have the original sketch and the original sign sketch and the garment. Mm. And Patti has stated that she will give them the actual Grammy that she won her estate will give the museum the Grammy that she won while she was wearing that garment. So all that's going to be part of the Smithsonian.
Congratulations to you.
Yes, thank you.
Congratulations to you.
Thank you.
As we have
to bring it back to Clara Branch. That's why I got carried away with me. Sorry
no,
about that.
Well, that's what this is. This
yes.
is about the trajectory towards success based on the experiences here with the Soul Club.
Well, actually, it did, in the sense because I was able to, from a perspective of a young person that had never been around anything like that, I was finally able to see how dynamic clothes could be to an audience. Mm-hmm. And so that kind of helped me realize that, okay, I see what the audience really responds to. Let's say if there was a reveal of a big opera coat into something small and tight, which is what I did for Pat, but I could see how the audience responded to that during my years of the Soul Club. How someone could come out in something and just drop it off the shoulder and keep walking, and the audience would just go crazy. So it's things like that I got to see and experiment with, and get a critique from my friends during that point. Like, I remember so many of people at that point that I was here with, we would just discuss certain things. And it wasn't about being territorial. It wasn't about one-upping anyone or trying to get ahead of anyone. Because even though, like I mentioned previously, there were certain people that were favorites of the Soul Club, so to speak, we were all in this together. All of us didn't necessarily get along. We didn't really argue or fight or anything because there was no reason for that. But we did what we had to do as a unit.
To get to the finish line.
To get to the finish line.
What would you tell young designers of color, and particularly young men of color who are in the design realm? What would you tell them today? Time flies, right? You're now on this side of it all.
Yes.
What would you advise, share, admonish?
What I would advise, and I don't need to give out advice because so many people think that, oh, he's old school, he's older, we know what we're doing. And fine. I would say first, don't think that your likes on social media equates to success. It has nothing to do with that. We could look at influencers from 4 years ago that are now living back at home with their parents because it doesn't mean anything. And also have some type of business savvy about yourself, in the sense that we could all make pretty dresses. However, you have to take into consideration that there's a cost factor involved in that. Not just the cost of the fabric, but the cost of your labor, the cost of shipping, the cost of your electricity. What if your machine breaks down? You have to pay for that also. So by charging $75, let's say, for a dress, but your fabric comes to $83, automatically you're working at a loss already. So I'm not saying overprice yourself, but just know that it's a business. Fashion is a
It's
business,
a business.
right? It's
It's a
commerce.
business.
It's business. And that's the one thing that I would say today, because so many brick and mortar stores have fallen by the wayside, in the sense that people don't really shop at brick and mortar stores. They shop online or through social media or whatever the case may be. And that's fine. Just know also that once you start advertising on social media, you're open up to a world of comments. And there may be more negative comments than positive comments. So you're going to have to really believe in yourself and believe in your product and have all of your boxes crossed and checked off to know that you're doing the best you can as far as what you're presenting to it, because you only get one bite of the apple, so to speak, before the negative comments come in. And so those comments last a while.
And stay
there. And people do screenshots now and comparisons and who wore it best. And there's a world of things. Like coming up, it was a moment, not a memory. Today it's a memory. That's the difference. Yeah.
It's been a joy. Thank you so very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you.